Hello and welcome back to Extraordinary Creatives, the podcast where I sit down with some of the world's most inspiring artists, designers, makers and creative thinkers to uncover what it really takes to build a meaningful, sustainable creative life. Today's guest is the remarkable Simone Brewster. Simone is an artist whose work moves effortlessly between sculpture, painting, jewellery, furniture, architecture and public installation. You might be thinking those disciplines seem worlds apart, but underneath them all is one beautifully consistent line of inquiry. Simone creates what she calls intimate architectures, objects and spaces that shape how we feel, how we connect with one another, and how we experience belonging. Her work draws on Black diasporic histories, architecture, material culture and memory, creating work that feels both timeless and unmistakably of its time. You may have seen her extraordinary exhibition at the Design Museum in London, or her work in the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington D.C. In this conversation, we explore everything from growing up in London with parents who valued both engineering and creativity to why making bag work is an essential part of becoming a great artist. We talk about finding your creative handwriting, building confidence through jewellery and personal objects, balancing self-initiated projects with commissions, creating public spaces that genuinely make people feel welcome, and why every creative education should include business strategy alongside artistic practice. This is a thoughtful, generous conversation about identity, courage, curiosity, and what it means to keep following the questions rather than limiting yourself to a single discipline. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Simone Brewster. Welcome to the Extraordinary Creatives podcast. Simone, would you introduce yourself for our listeners and tell us about what you do in your own words?
I'm Simone Brewster. I'm an artist. I'm based in London. And my outputs have been painting, sculpture, public art, and installation. And really what I'm looking at is how objects and spaces can create feelings of memory and connection and welcome, and this idea of introducing heritage in a way, a forgotten heritage in a way that is open to debate and kind of fills the gaps that I think are present in art and design.
Beautiful. So where did you grow up and what would you say your earliest memories are of being creative?
I grew up in London, so I've always been based here. I'm the middle of two other girls. Lived in Harlesden actually with my mum and dad for a huge chunk of my life. And it's really interesting because being creative was always a part of my life, but it was never what I thought I would do because my dad really wanted all of his daughters to become either mathematicians or computer scientists, something like that. It was very much a science and maths focused household. My mum was really creative and is really creative. She studied tailoring and then went on to do a whole bunch of other things. So I had this contrast where I had a dad who's really kind of fixed in what he wanted us to do and a mum who kind of displayed that you can turn your hand to anything and give anything a go. And she was always really good at that. And my first memories of being creative, I was always drawing as a child, always drawing. And it was when I was drawing and went on this a family trip to Trinidad, where my dad's from. We all went over to Trinidad when I was about 6 years old. And that's the first time I had the idea that maybe it could become something more.
What was it about that trip to Trinidad that kind of stirred something in you?
So I was, as well as climbing trees and like running up and down outside, it was amazing. I was drawing loads and people, my family over there would see my drawings and everyone would comment on it. But it was a particular experience of going to a house. I didn't know it was my dad's cousin's house at the time, but it was. And when we went inside, I was saying, Dad, why is this house so cool on the inside? Because so many of the other spaces we'd gone into, they needed fans or AC, and it didn't look like it didn't have fans. The windows weren't open, but it was cool. And I said, how come it's so cool compared to the other places, kind of thing, in my 6-year-old vocabulary. And he said, oh, it's because my cousin designed it this way. He's an architect and he's designed it to be this way. And I was like, oh. So I had this idea that you could like change, make things feel a certain way through how it's been designed. I didn't know the word design. I just thought, wow, you can make homes that feel like this. And I think that was the first idea then. And then on that trip, people started to say, oh, maybe you're going to be an architect. And then I told myself, oh, I'm going to be an architect. So pretty much since the age of 6, I told myself, I'm going to be an architect. And I think that really kind of swayed my whole first part of my creative outlook and my creative life to have this goal of becoming this architect.
Yeah, I love that, because there's something really powerful about imagining ourselves into being in what you've said, you know, that idea of actually visualizing something could be possible for me, but then having a number of kind of believing mirrors around you who are like, yeah, you could be an architect. So powerful, right? Because that gives us this feeling in us that, yeah, I can step into that space.
What you said is really interesting, because the idea of being an architect is something that I think is really interesting at that age. And I look at my trajectory and I think I really understand that if that trip didn't happen and that simple conversation didn't happen, I don't know if I'd be here. Not because I would stop drawing, but because coming from like a Caribbean background, and especially with my dad who had this really strong focus on maths and science, I feel like we didn't have the idea, like even the idea of doing certain creative jobs don't exist. I didn't think I'm going to be a sculptor. I didn't think I'm going to be a painter. I was drawing. I wasn't drawing buildings. I was just drawing everything. I didn't think I'm going to be a painter or an illustrator. These words don't come into the normal, or I don't think when I was growing up, didn't come into the normal vocabulary in my home life. So the idea of becoming that, even though I was like focused on the arts, was never going to be in my mind. It was never going to be an idea, let's say.
Yeah.
But because it got, that seed got planted at that age, it became something that felt really tangible.
Yeah, I'm really struck by your mum being a tailor as well, and how the kind of the precision of a kind of sort of the 3-dimensional becoming again there, you know, where you construct a way of being. So I'm really into fashion, how people express themselves through their clothing. And I see that as a kind of representative architecture in some way, you know. 100%. And so that, and I noticed that particularly about the way you create jewellery, you know, and the way you think about space. It's about how the subject almost relates to themselves, but also to the space that they find themselves navigating.
Yeah, exactly. This is kind of core to my practice, is this idea that the objects that we surround ourselves, not just on our body, but in our environments, in our homes and the widest like environment, how they reflect back to us, how we relate to them. Why do we choose certain objects to live with? How the objects we choose curate a way of thinking and a way of expressing our internal lives. All of these kind of things. I think jewellery is a really interesting vehicle to explore that, because it's something that we don't just have in our homes. We carry it out into the world when we wear it on our bodies, and it can act like a kind of armor or a way of presenting ourselves. But there's definitely in my work a kind of interrogation taking place as to how the objects and the shape and the texture, the materiality, this kind of hidden understanding and language that we have of the world around us can be used to express ourselves and communicate and bring people together.
So when did you make that connection between kind of that ambition or that desire to be an architect, and that you could express a kind of internal landscape?
It's an evolution. It's an evolution of an idea and a kind of a series of chance developments and projects and thinking. It's not something that happened overnight. So basically, I did go off and study architecture, but whilst I was studying architecture, I loved making. Basically, I studied when I was doing my course. I did essentially what they call the making course. I was in the workshops and basically making in the workshops and exploring architecture through material and texture. But they always had this project every year where you'd make an object and explore the material of an object, just to ensure that when you're designing buildings and spaces, you have an actual understanding of how materials work. And that was the one that I loved the most. And I was quite young when I got my first degree. So I said, okay, I'm going to go and work, get some money, and then I'm going to go and do a master's and have some more time making and get it out of my system, use it to skill up, come back and keep going. But I went and did this master's at the Royal College of Art, and that was kind of like, kind of blew my head open, because there's so many different disciplines. When you're there, you go into different rooms, you see vehicle designs doing this, and ceramics and glass are doing that, illustration are doing that, and it's just like you literally have your mind blown open. And that experience, I was in the workshops, yes, making, but just being exposed to different ways of expressing my creativity away from this idea of what architecture could be. And essentially, I just didn't want to go back. I wanted to keep on doing. And whilst I was there, I wrote this dissertation as well, which was about pretty much what we're talking about, how the objects we surround ourselves with become part of how we express our internal lives. Why do we choose objects? Why do we choose the things that we do in the way that we do to kind of do that? And that was the first kind of inkling into something that would become part of my practice in a bigger sense. And then as it developed, it wasn't just, when you do a dissertation, you're kind of observing and using examples, but then it was about me making my own examples and creating spaces with this as the central focal point of the pieces.
Were there objects at home when you were growing up that kind of informed some of that thinking too?
That's a good question, because I would say it did, but it's not. So it did. So, yes. When I was at home, we had lots of kind of African sculptures or Black-centric sculptures. I didn't really think of it like that because it's your home. You don't really think of, you just think your home's your home. You don't really interrogate the materials and the forms and whatever, but they're kind of influencing you. And I think that was a really strong foundation, because it kind of normalized certain things in my life. It normalized seeing myself in a certain way, understanding my culture in a certain way, and then going out into the design world and kind of making your way. You realize that there's an absence of this representation, say. There's an absence of this perspective. And it was that absence that started to be the thing that made me realize that my practice had a purpose, not just to create random objects that are maybe beautiful or functional, but to create objects that spoke to this missing voice that I felt was taking place.
And so to some extent, your enthusiasm for a diverse way of thinking about materiality was also about manifesting objects that would shape the world that we see differently.
Exactly. So I started to realize that, okay, this is the space, this is the design world, this is the world that I'm trying to enter. How can we create objects that talk about something that isn't currently taking place? So where is the kind of female, Black, Caribbean influenced, African influenced voices that are creating objects that talk about this kind of perspective? And the practice started to take this form where it was interrogating that missing, that void, that thing that I felt was missing, and starting to create objects to fill that void and to talk about things from a perspective that I just thought wasn't really happening in the wider design world at that point.
What does the female perspective feel like to you now?
I'm in my 40s. So the female perspective at this point is a very different thing than it would have been in my 20s or 30s, I'd say.
Yeah, tell me.
Even, being a mum, it all changes how that perspective takes shape and takes form. I think it's an interesting one. And, realistically, we're living in a very, the world right now is a very interesting place. And the things that are happening in a wider sense, and how that plays in my practice is an interesting balance. I feel like being a woman right now is a multiple of different things. There's so many different ways to live as a woman and to engage with society. But as a creative, the commentary and the feedback that I'm kind of trying to put into my work, so I can one of the growing bodies of work that I'm creating now, the paintings, looking at how female objectification takes place, how there's a disconnect between how a woman looks on the outside versus her internal landscape, and expressing that on canvas has been really fun. It's also been a learning curve. But when you look at the deeper themes in these paintings, it's really talking about objectification, the idea that women aren't taken as their whole selves all the time, and quite heavy themes, even if the paintings themselves seem quite light. Being a woman right now is I think it's a tough one, actually.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm curious as to how those ideas impact the form itself. So the forms that come through your work, and I was thinking about it because looking at your jewellery, and I'm a huge jewellery fan. I studied jewellery as well when I was at art college, and I have a real enthusiasm for people's ideas and the concepts and the kind of contribution they want to make, impacting the forms, the shape, the line, the materials, the colours, and that essence. And there's something about your jewellery that I can't help thinking sometimes they're like superhero kind of talismans, or superwoman. And certainly some of the kind of amulets or like cuffs, they feel like it's really empowering and kind of bold. And there's something, and so I was curious as to what was informing those forms.
Pretty much what you've said. So the route into jewellery wasn't about necessarily creating objects that did that. But then once I started making jewellery and looking at how, it was actually kind of a response to looking at how women responded to the jewellery I was making. So my first collection, and I never actually really intended to make jewellery. It was kind of an accident about encountering a piece of ebony, and then the ebony was this big. The only thing I could make at this scale was a piece of jewellery, to really respect the material and kind of talk about how wood has grown over hundreds of years. And, so I came up with this visual language to cut the wood in a way that would expose the grain and to treat it in a very special way. But the rings were quite big. They were just rings that I made. It's called Ebony Revolution, that collection. And they were just rings. And women would look at them and they'd be like, oh, this is amazing. I love it. Oh, but I could never wear that. I couldn't do that. And I started to think, like, why can't you wear this? And you start to realize that even within being people who love your work and love the pieces you're making, can feel that they need something, they need to be bigger to wear them. And so instead of going smaller, I started to go even bigger. I started to make, even bigger pieces of jewelry, even bigger bracelets, almost like, and necklaces, almost like you said, as if I was creating an armor. And actually I found when I wore them, it done a really helpful job. So if I'd be at a fair or going and doing public speaking, it kind of, you put that on and it's job done. You've got your whole presentation and you're ready to go. It's that like finishing touch of that energy. And I felt that was what I wanted to do with the jewelry. I wanted it to not just talk about the materials, which I felt were precious, but to give the person wearing it kind of armor to face the world, and this kind of strength in the pieces. Yeah.
I really relate to that. And sometimes when young women ask me about something I'm wearing, I like wearing big, bold things, especially when I'm doing public talks. And people will always comment on it. And as an introvert, that's a really great cue to be able to talk to someone, because there's a reason that's not me personally, but I've chosen something that somebody else has made. So it's not me. I didn't make it, but it's a beautiful representation of skill, craft, attention, love. But also then it opens up a conversation, and more than that, it does what you said, which is it helps me step into a space where I want to feel. And so I pick and I curate every single day. I curate what I'm wearing according to how I want to feel. So if I'm doing a public event, and lots of times young women have asked me about it, and I had this idea when I was younger that it was like a dazzle ship. Do you know? Did you ever study dazzle ships when you were at college?
Oh yes, it's the warship. So when you're from far, they couldn't really get you because it looked weird with the black and white painting on.
That's right. Well, they're like multiple colours, so they're like this crazy abstract painting on warships, which I always really loved the idea. I don't love the idea of war, I have to be say, but that idea that something could be so bonkers that it's almost invisible. So I like the fact that you can wear something that makes you visible and kind of invisible simultaneously, do you know? And so sometimes that gives you that extra presence. I think for young women in particular who are afraid of stepping into that space, I love the idea that you're saying, actually, I want you to go bigger. I want you to go bolder. I want you to step into your power. So 100%. To me, that's what your jewellery does, which is, I was really curious as to what the motivations were. So.
But what you said there is we need to break that down actually, because one, you said a few things. You said, when I choose a piece of jewellery, which is exactly the point I'm making, when we choose, we need these items to do jobs for us that we can't always do for ourselves.
Yes.
So you're choosing a piece of jewellery because you're like, I want it to be, I want colour, I want scale. I want it to feel precise. I want it to feel handmade, or, you're saying, because what you're doing is you're looking for a value system that aligns with your own, that can be externalized.
Yes.
You see what I mean? So that's what we're doing with, yes, the jewelry, but with the clothes, with the chair, with all of these objects that we surround ourselves with. And another thing you've said, something that I've been dying to talk to a few friends of mine about, is stepping into the persona, because the persona allows us to do things that we don't allow ourselves to do. And so you're curating the persona that you can step into the woman that you need to be to do that job. So when you're curating your outfit, you're going, okay, today I need to do, what items do I bring together to allow me to be comfortable in this role that I know I have to play for myself in this moment. And our objects do that for us.
I think so. For me, they're like magical, do you know? And I think that particularly if I'm, let's say I'm feeling a little vulnerable or a little, every day and that song, I'm Every Woman, it's so corny, but I think for so many women, we are so multifarious in the way we think, the way we feel. We can be simultaneously shy and powerful. We can be scared shitless and still willing to do the thing. And so for me, I pick something that helps me in that magical state, which is really like, actually, I'm always terrified when I step out onto a stage. And I'm going to do it because I think it's important that middle-aged women like me don't disappear, that we have a voice, we have knowledge, we have experience to share. And if all the shy, creative people don't have a voice, then who gets the most voice in our society? Yes. All the dominant, loudmouth, arrogant people who are trying to sell us shit all the time. Yeah. So I think what you're doing is really saying that actually through taking care and precision, we can actually choose to have something with us that actually represents how I want to be today, how I want to feel in my home, in my life. So I think that care that you bring to what you do, Simone, is beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
So the other thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about is the fact that you are not bound by the rules of a medium in your thinking. And I always bring people onto the podcast to try and demonstrate this, because I hear a lot from artists who are painters or sculptors or writers or poets or comedians that have really committed to their craft and they're experts in their field, but then sometimes they feel like they've created a ceiling for themselves and they worry that stepping into another space or another zone is not for them. They won't be taken seriously, or they might not be as good in that new strand. And you don't seem bound by those rules. How did you learn to apply yourself in any medium and enjoy the ride of it?
I think you have to be comfortable in not being good at things all the time. I think a lot of creatives, like you say, once you start niching in, you become so good at the thing that you do. You're such a specialist and you're such a perfectionist and you're such a leader in your field, and that makes you feel like a certain type of person. To then admit that you're a novice somewhere else doesn't feel comfortable. So you don't want to do it. Or you genuinely just don't have the urge to do it, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm happy here, why am I going to move? For me, it's just more following the questions and the answers. I felt like sometimes the answer to a question is in a medium that I'm not comfortable in, but that doesn't mean that I shouldn't explore the answer. So I will go and, I'll start to make jewellery, because jewellery was literally just because I had a question and the medium meant that the appropriate answer was jewellery. Do you see what I mean? So it wasn't that, I'm going to become a jewellery designer. It was more like, I think that this is the right thing for what I want to explore at this point. And that has been the journey that's led me to doing many of the multidisciplinary things within my practice. It's been a search for answering questions and not being scared to essentially be a novice or be rubbish or ask for help or do bad work. I think there's a lie that's been perpetuated more on Instagram now, because we have Instagram and it's such a visual platform, that the final thing was the first thing you did. So no, I done a lot of bad stuff before I got to this medium good stuff. And then I'm going to have to do a lot more medium good stuff before I get to the really good stuff. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think we need to be comfortable with that part of ourselves that's learning. And if we give ourselves the space to say, look, I'm always learning, I'm always trying and improving, it's a lot less intimidating to open the door to try something else. It doesn't mean it's going to be your whole practice, but even allowing yourself a little bit of a mental space where you can say, I can be bad at this and it can still be fun, can do a world of good in the area where you're really, really strong at anyway.
So true. I'm curious then if we could take a recent project as an example, for you to walk us through a process. Like, how did you decide what form that was going to take, and what was the process for getting you there?
In some of my work is the pieces are self-initiated projects. This is kind of the weird thing about my practice, I think, is we've got a large body of self-initiated projects, which are just kind of me, the artist Simone, making and observing and, like I say, exploring and skilling and developing. And then I've worked with clients who they tell me what they want the outcome to be in terms of, like, this has to be a pavilion. So pavilion is a thing. Do you see? I can't
Yes.
or I'd like you to design a carpet. I'm not going to design them a chair. Do you see what I mean? So there's there are some specific outcomes. And
I think let's talk through the pavilion then, because I think that's a beautiful example of a work that actually does seem to reflect how you approach everything, even though it had an outcome in mind.
That was an amazing project. It was last year. It was for the client was Brookfield Properties, but the real thing that made it special as well was the collaboration between myself and the curator, Samantha Williams. She was amazing because really she gave me the space to explore pretty much what you're asking me, to take it step by step by step and develop and go deeper and refine. And that space, I think, is why the final project is so good. Essentially, it was a bit of an unusual one because in some respects there was so much freedom, and often when you have projects you don't have freedom, especially on that scale with those kind of budgets. It's kind of like they almost write you the thing they want. We want this, but you just do it, but we want this. And it was like, okay, we want a summer pavilion. Come up with an idea. I felt like, is there a catch here? This doesn't happen. But I came up with an initial concept, and to be honest, the first concept, by the last stage, just before we went into fabrication, I think it was concept 15, or let's say iteration 15 that actually got made. So that's to tell you a little bit about the number of times it was refined, and what really happens, not just about budgets and all those kind of more boring things, but what really happened is like, what do we want this space to feel like, and how are we going to curate this journey through the space? How do I want people to feel? Now, how can I explore that or encourage that with the shapes, the materials, the colors that we use? What are the markers? How are we going to guide people through? And so it became like really, it was both a macro and a micro form of design, where you're designing this thing that is going to take up a certain amount of space and going to be there for a certain amount of time, but you're also designing, the person, how did they go through the entrance, and what did they see? How do we make this moment special, and how do we guide them to a place where they can? So in a way, it was two projects taking place. It was the idea of designing a coherent space, a coherent environment, and then it was the idea of, now what do we see when we're sitting from this seat, or what happens when I pass through this doorway? How can the colors shift to make it? And a lot of the moves were quite subtle, but the final piece was really, really rewarding, and it pulled on, like you, I think, were pointing to, it pulled on many parts of my practice. The seats themselves were like sculptural objects, but then the top element of the seat was like an abstract female form that was kind of taken from my painting. And then there were parts like when you went through the entrance, it's kind of what I call a deep hallway, a deep doorway. So for a moment, you're inside the door, and there were engravings of hieroglyphics I'd done. I call them hieroglyphics, but really they were just image drawings paintings that I'd simplified down to become engraved into the surface, and then kind of makes you question what's happening here. And then you go through, and it's really curating this journey, basically.
So for our listeners and our viewers, perhaps could you describe the finished piece and the colours? Because okay. I think there's a kind of vibe of the place that you created, and I'm sort of curious as to what that mood board might have looked like for you at the as you were pulling the ideas together.
So yeah, the piece is called Temple of Relics, and I think the name even influenced the piece. I wanted it to feel like a sanctuary in the city. It was located in Liverpool Street, or near Liverpool Street, where there's not really any parks, lots of tall buildings, very, very built up area. And then the question was like, how do we create a space that feels calm, allows people to pause, offers some shade, welcomes people so it's not intimidating, and doesn't feel, even though it's a temporary pavilion, that it has a sense of permanence so people can truly relax and feel comfortable. And that was done through lots of different things. So I designed this kind of fragmented building. So there was no singular roof, but there were arched spaces that kind of felt like, or gave a call back to more grander architecture, let's say. And there were fragments of doorways that you'd walk through that greeted you into the space, but there was never a whole building, just these elements that came together that presented you with the feeling of it being a space that was both important and peaceful and welcoming. Then we've got these sculptural seats that you sit on, made out of our sapelli wood, really nicely finished. So the materials we chose were important. So instead of just using plywood or these kind of finishes, we had real wood surfaces. We had tile, which is quite an architectural finish, and then we had stucco painted onto the walls, so it felt like it was like a concretey or clay finish. And then the color story was shades of terracotta, so it felt like it was coming from the earth. So all these little shifts, and then playing with how even the surfaces were painted with slightly different shades of this terracotta to add to the weight and three-dimensionality of the elements. And then I used these cork urns as markers to kind of have the space feel as if it was grounded in a more history than it really did have, as well as those kind of hieroglyphics. It meant that it had both a feeling of being a contemporary space, but also having a history to it. And people then had a kind of questioning awareness of what is this space that we're in, and why does it feel special, and these kind of things. It was quite an interesting project.
Did you look at sundials at all when you were thinking about that?
I didn't. I looked at a lot of West African architecture where they build their houses out of clay and kind of put patterns on the front in this stucco, and they had this really red clay, and I was obsessed with this clay. And they'd even paint afterwards. Sometimes they'd paint it a different color, and I was like, I want this texture. I want it to feel or to look like it has this feeling of being of the earth.
Yes.
And
I guess I really got that sense, and also the sunshine element, or me think about the sun and time, was because I really got that sense of the earth and the heat, but also the way that the color changes as the time of the day shifts. And that's what I was thinking about, the kind of the light hitting some of those walls, because you were creating new shadows, but you were also creating like this kind of weird 2D, 3D elements throughout. So, but it makes perfect sense, that kind of, that sort of African temperature and atmosphere really, really makes sense.
It's funny because when now you say, I can imagine why you thought that as well, because in the middle, in the main arch, they had this huge kind of obelisk-y column with a sculpture on the top, and I think that really could feel like a sundial element. It's quite interesting. I'm gonna carry that one.
Well, that's great. It's just because I think there is something about time in your work where there's a timelessness, which is like this very particular space that you occupy, where even in your jewellery or the plant pots that are kind of to die for, to be honest, I could definitely see some of your plant pots in my space here, the blues, the rich blues and colours. But there's the forms that you refer to, they kind of could be almost relics or from different times, from anything from the Deco period through to like ancient Africa, and I love that kind of moving between time zones as well as that kind of cultural nods, but the female form is definitely in there. There's a kind of this
100%.
And I was thinking, going back to this combination between your mum and your dad, where you have this kind of maths, engineering, precision, with then the fluidity of the body and that kind of mapping out onto the female form somehow. We've got this lovely duality in the work. It's interesting thinking about your roots.
That's funny. I never thought of, it's true though. You've got the kind of perspective of my dad, which is this kind of really structured, and then my mom, which is she's in many ways very fluid, and that does come through in the work, I think. It's true.
Yeah. So in that, what did you learn from that project?
Oh, I learned loads. It was amazing. It was the largest project that I'd done, public art project that I'd done. And it was very much in some respects it was a team effort because we had to work with engineers. The location was really unusual. So even though it looks like it's on solid ground, underneath there's the train tracks because it's near Liverpool Street Station. So loading, all these things that no one thinks about. They just look at the final thing, but it's like actually we had weight load restrictions for each area. So then, I wanted to have these elements, fragments of buildings going up into the sky, but then it was in a wind trap. So we had to find a way to weight them so they wouldn't just fall over if there was a gust of wind. And then once we start weighting things, how do you weight things when you've got a load tolerance? So it was a lot of really, in a way, this is the bits that I think I'm most proud about the design end up being how I accommodated these restrictions into the piece without it feeling like those were the dominating factors of the piece. So how do you design them so it just feels like it's meant to be like that? And you're not making this this bench because the bench isn't positioned here because it has to hold this extremely tall wall. It's just there because that's the right place for it to be. Like accommodating these restrictions and simplifying and refining them so that it felt harmonious. I think that was the big learning. But in honesty, it was a really big engineering project, and working with the fabricators and the engineers to bring it all together was a learning curve, but a really, really valuable one that I'd love to do again. Amazing project.
Yeah. How did they find you, Simone? How did they come to you?
I love that question because I always ask that. I could say, how did you find me? This is one of the most amazing things about being a creative, and one of the things I think is really important whenever you're talking to anyone who's thinking about getting a career in the arts. You never know who's watching you.
Yeah.
You think that no one cares, or you didn't get the thing that you went for, and you only have how many followers and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter what the quantity is. It matters who the people are. And I have no idea. My focus is always kind of do the work, share the work.
Yes. Love
so
that.
I'm doing the work and I'm sharing it. And then you get a phone call or you get an email and you're like, how did you find me? Oh, I've been following you for 3 years. Yes. You haven't said anything to me for 3 years. Like you've just been the amount of people who are lurking your page and following your trajectory. You have no idea. And that's why your focus can't be on publications or whatever it is. Your focus can only really be on like doing good work.
I know you find the art world baffling sometimes. It is. This is exactly why I built the membership. Inside the membership, artists rebuild their confidence. They reignite their pride. They recover their sense of play and finally feel like they belong. They land studio visits, sales, shows, better fees, stronger relationships, and a genuine sense of agency. Here's how it works. You get the online membership hub on your laptop or phone and gain instant access to every live session, replay and worksheet, as well as an active community, so you're never stuck waiting for an answer again. You get weekly advice sessions with me where you can ask me anything you're stuck with, and I'm going to give you straight, honest answers. And you get coaching with me at an affordable rate. Plus, there are real-life meetups, expert webinars, monthly studio visits with members, and 4 guest artist studio visits a year where you can ask your own questions live. And the best bit? It's an affordable price every month and you can cancel anytime. So please don't keep struggling on a loan. Try it. 2 months from now, you could have answers to things that have been holding you back for years. I think that what you've done, which I encourage every creative that I work with to do, is actually there is a clarity in your line of inquiry. So one of the reasons I start at this podcast asking people about the kind of origin story, if you like, is because there's usually some clues in there as to what also has been kind of excavated over the course of an artist's life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you've given us some of those clues, but also then you consistently bring your questioning to any medium. And so if we look at your, public art, your paintings, your jewellery, whatever medium you apply yourself to, it looks like Simone Brewster. So one of the things that I love is the fact that you are consistently you, and you bring that kind of whoever's looking, you're just doing it because you're doing it because you love it and you like doing it, but you're doing it at a high level and a high standard across everything you do. And so then we can take that arc over everything you do, and it could be fashion. You could do a Marks and Spencer's carrier bag, thinking about Yinka Ilori and how he, same sort of rules, whether it's, a rug, again, you've made some gorgeous rugs, whatever it is, it looks like Simone Brewster. And I think that's the essence, that you have to stay committed to that line of inquiry, regardless of, whatever somebody's commissioning you to do.
When I taught, this was something that I think is really hard to teach, but it's actually the most important thing to teach. It's to do with finding your own handwriting. That's how I put it. So if me and you write the same sentence, one's going to look like my handwriting and one's going to look like yours. And in saying that, there's no right or wrong, because it's just the sentence. And I feel like a lot of young designers and creatives, they're not comfortable with their handwriting, or they haven't practiced it enough. And so it becomes an exercise in, learning, finding a way in to yourself. The things, where your value systems lie, what materials, what inspirations, and then ask the why, not just like, oh, I really like, because often it ends at the first bit. I'm really love nature. I'm inspired by it, but why? Nature. Firstly, nature's everywhere. What does that mean? Which parts of nature? Slugs are nature. Mosquitoes are nature. I don't love mosquitoes. Which part of it? And then why? And then how? And then you develop your handwriting that way, so that when someone comes to you with a project, they actually know what they're asking for. Because it's like you were saying with the jewellery. The person doesn't know that you didn't know that piece of jewellery existed, but when you encountered it, it had all of those value systems, all of the ingredients that you were looking for. So you knew that fit for the thing you wanted. And I think that's kind of what your body of work should be doing for you. You should be making bodies of work that express your value system, have a clear handwriting, so that when someone comes and asks you to do something and you do it, it's not a shock, because they kind of were buying into what you're doing anyway.
That's right. And I think that if we're lucky, we don't, some commissioners really do say, I want that, like you said, but actually most people trust you to deliver something they hadn't quite anticipated, because they're looking for that very particular U-shaped thing. So I think you're right, but I'm going to ask, has there been a moment, Simone, where you've been embarrassed by your own handwriting?
Oh, all the time. Well, this is such a funny question. It's like, this is what I was kind of pointing to before, when you were saying you work in many different mediums. I have to be bad at something before I get good at it. And it's so much pressure to be good all the time that you have to make bad work. I think we have to normalize this and talk about the fact that bad work comes before good work. And then more bad work will happen after you've done good work as well.
Yes.
Just because you do a good project, it doesn't suddenly mean you're never going to do a bad piece of... No, that's not how it works. It's like part of the growth. Otherwise, you're just doing the same thing in different colours. Do you know what I mean? That's fine. But if you actually want to be on a learning journey and a growth journey, you're going to do something bad. It's part of the growth journey. I don't like it. I don't like doing bad work. It's very frustrating. It takes just as much time to do bad work as good work, often longer, and all of these things. But it's just part of it. You just have to do the bad work. And then I think the difference between getting to the good work and just being stuck at the bad work is when you start interrogating what you've done. Often the bad work wins when you're interrogating the bad work or whilst you're doing it. You've just tried to do something new. Whilst you're doing it, you're criticizing, oh, this is rubbish. That's the wrong time.
Yeah.
You do the work, you do the whole thing, then you go, is this good or bad? And then you go, why? Why is this rubbish? Why don't I like it? You can write it down on a list, and then you go, okay, so that's what I'm focused on improving. And then you do the next stage, and it might be a bit better. And we keep going, and I think for me, that's how I approach it. I'm annoyed that I have to, at some points, make bad work, but I acknowledge it's part of the journey. And then I just hope that if I keep going, it becomes good work.
I'm so glad that you shared and said it like that, Simone, because I think one thing I share with artists and creative professionals that I work with every day is that I think the difference between people who really have an enjoyable, sustainable creative career are the people that are willing to feel their way through those tricky times of the work not being what they want, but it has to be done. You don't come out the womb going straight to great. You have to wade through that kind of sea of Mars bars of shit to get to the good stuff.
Exactly.
But I think, are you willing to be shit? That's my question. I ask it myself. I've just been writing a book, as everyone will know. And on Monday, I handed in the second manuscript. But my God, I went through rivers of shit, Simone, to get there.
This is it.
Do you know? And the question is, exactly, are you willing to do it? And if it means that I get to do what I love every day, then hell yes. Exactly. Same for you, right? Hell yes. Oh, yeah. So I have to ask, you've shared so much of what you've learned from those different projects. You differentiated between a self-initiated and then a commissioned. So in your kind of daily practice, how do you manage those? Do you always have a self-initiated running at the same time as commissions? How do you manage it?
I think there's always self-initiated things, 100%. There's always going to be self-initiated projects because it's part of the multidisciplinary thing. It means that something's always brewing. You're always kind of feeding yourself, putting some money in the bank of curiosity and interest. And then hopefully when you have a project that comes from the outside, you've invested enough to birth something new. Or at least an evolution of a sister or a brother to what you've done before, not the same thing. So I'm always working on something for myself or something that is not being commissioned externally. And then you always want to have a commission because the difference between the two in terms of a business model is when you do a self-initiated project, you then have to go and find a client to then buy it or invest in it or whatever. So there's like you make a thing and then you need someone to come on board, believe in it, purchase it, ask for 10 of them, whatever it is. But if someone comes and they say, we need 10, it's like, okay, they normally come and they tell you financially, you're secure, blah, blah, blah. So they're kind of two sides to the business. And then it also means that you get asked questions that cause you to evolve. So no one had asked me to do a pavilion before. I knew I could do a pavilion, but you get the opportunity to evidence that you can do a pavilion, or you get the opportunity to evidence. And so it's kind of a hand in hand. I'm constantly working on my own thing to keep that kind of direction of the practice and the value system and all of those things growing. And then hopefully this attracts some outside interest and I get to do bigger projects with fabricators and bigger budgets and blah, blah, blah. And then that might go and get the next one coming down the line whilst I'm working on something else here. It's kind of a hand in hand.
Yeah. How did the Design Museum show come about? And can you tell us about how the process of that developed?
I have no idea. We've been looking at you for a while. Okay. So I actually don't know why me. I would say, why me specifically? I'd say, obviously, I've got this body of work and a practice that's been grown over the last couple of years to become more prominent, but it's been around for a while. Some of the pieces in that show are 15, 15, between 15 and 20 years old, something like that. So it's not that it's just happened. And I think that's another thing to kind of be aware of. Often when people see someone getting prominent things, they think, oh, look, it's just happened. Like, I've been making work for a long time, and this is a nice reward. But yes, I got approached and they said that they wanted to do this show. And to be honest, I wasn't actually sure I wanted to do it. Not because it's an amazing opportunity. It was more me wanting them to understand how I was different to what I thought they wanted. And that's kind of might be my issue more than theirs. So essentially I was like, okay, you do realize that I am not a design lovey. I'm not on the inside track. No, but it's true. It's like, I have a lot of my work is, as I mentioned, self-made, self-initiated projects. So if you're thinking that you're going to be able to show certain things, you're going to have to ask the people who have bought them to loan it to us. Because I don't, if I have a body of work that is mainly based on working with large-scale fabricators and manufacturers, you can just go, oh, we're doing a show with Simone, can we have one of those things actually? And they'd give you one off the shelf. Here it is. But if you're doing something that's a one-off and it's been sold to someone who lives on the other side of the world, then it's like, oh, this contract is very different. And do you see what I mean? So I wanted to point out to them that this might not be an easy show to put on, because at least 50% of my work isn't going to be with fabricators and large so just getting the pieces in is going to be a challenge. But they were really confident, and in the end we kind of pulled it together, which is amazing. I think the curatorial team and the team, they were really good at like making sure that I had the pieces that would translate what's going on in my practice really well to the public. And it was pretty much a process. It didn't happen overnight. It was kind of like 10 months. They came over to the studio, looked through a whole bunch of boxes, made a long list of objects that they wanted, made a list of objects that were required by other people that they wanted. Then it's like writing to people and hoping they'll give it to you, and like some of them just ignored it. Didn't hear back.
Oh, so interesting.
Yeah, it wasn't a straight line, but I do think in the end, I'm really happy with the show that we've got on display right now. It's really good.
It's incredible, Simone. And I'm curious as to how did you and the curators decide what story you wanted to tell through the objects?
This is what I love. This is actually one of the things that I love, is the fact I didn't have to do that. Because what happens is that's kind of the curator's job. I invite them in. I talk to them loads. The curator is Hadil El Tayeb, and she's the person who kind of helps the public navigate my practice. So she comes, she looks through all my stuff. We have all these conversations, and she starts making notes in a little notebook. You keep on saying this. You keep on saying this. She picked up on the fact that I always use this word translate, which is a really important word in my practice, because often I'm saying I'm translating a painting into a sculpture, or a sculpture into a painting, or translating one idea from one medium to a next, or one material to another material. So she picked up on this word translate, and that how central that is to my practice, that it's not a series of disconnected things that I'm interrogating and making just this and then this. It's that actually it's one question that has many outputs, and that different questions come in along the way for different reasons. And so she curated this experience where you kind of understand my influences, my home life, COVID, how that made this happen, hand making, the fact that but being craft has a place, and it's developed my practice in certain ways. And so she takes you through this kind of journey. It's not necessarily from start to finish. What's the word? As things happen, first she did this,
Chronological.
chronological. That's what. It's not necessarily chronological, but she's showing you how themes run through each piece, and it might be connecting a piece of jewellery with a piece of furniture or a piece of sculpture, but that theme, that question, is still the thing that unites and kind of sits as a foundation to the practice.
Yeah, beautiful. And at time of recording, the show is still on. How long is it on, so our listeners could go and visit it?
It's on until the end of January 2027. So you got another 6 months or so. 7. Well, we're almost through June, so 6 months to go and see it. It's a great place because the Design Museum, my show is going to be free to the public. It's free. You can just go in and take the kids. Yeah.
So the show is an incredible kind of moment in your career, and I'm curious, having that kind of zooming out and looking at it and having it reflected back to you in that way, what are your key takeaways so far?
It's still happening, so I'm still in the process. It's a really interesting moment, like you say. It's firstly, you walk in and it's got my name on the bill. Like, you walk in as Simone Brewster, the ego gets lots of pats. You're doing such a good job. But then it's also real life. It's like, I haven't suddenly won £2 million, and I still have to do all the same things in my daily life. I'm trying to reach out. I'm reaching out to people I've always wanted to talk to. I have a good excuse, come, I'll walk you around my show and blah, blah, blah. But to be honest, it's kind of, I feel like this is the wrong moment. Remember when I was describing how to develop your practice and take on things that you're not good at? It's like you do the work, and then after you do the work, you ask if it's good or bad. I feel like I'm still in the middle of this moment where I can't really grasp all of the things, all of the emotional things, but it's going to be after January, and when I can sit back and really understand it. In this moment, I'm still working with it. I'm still trying to get people to come and see the show because I know they'll love it. I'm still trying to absorb and take it all in. So it's kind of a weird moment to talk about it.
Yeah, I think it's a really important thing that you just shared, actually, in that desire to continue participating whilst something is still live. And it's a really tough moment, I think, for a lot of artists when they have a show on, because mostly they prefer to go and lie down and have a rest for a while, as I'm sure you do. But the idea that actually it's for you to have agency continuing, you have to be intimate with somebody in the space of the show by bringing one person at a time into relationship with the work, because it's like having an enormous studio for a period, right? Isn't it? Where you can invite people into the studio and say, here it is, laid out my process, my way of thinking, my commitment to what I'm doing, but also what does it make you think about? What does it make you feel? How does it help you think through what you're doing as a creative person? And so I love to hear that, Simone, that you're continuing to bring people in and take people through it, because I think most artists would prefer to just run off and let somebody else do that heavy lifting. But I always say you can't afford to let that happen, right?
Yeah, I it's a weird one. I want to take at least one person, or reach out and have someone that I want to talk to come down at least once a week. But the reality is as well that life is life and you can't do that. But I definitely once every 2 weeks go and take, and even to be honest, it's great to focus on industry connections and trying to talk with people I've always wanted to talk to. But another thing I'm doing is just giving lectures to universities and getting students to go around. It's amazing. I had no idea that the Design Museum had so many students, so many young people in that space. And it means that I'm connecting with the next generation or two of designers coming up and creative people coming up, and that is amazing. So I'm going and giving talks to universities, and I'm kind of trying to be transparent about the fact that this didn't happen overnight. It's not an easy path, and just the realities of what it is to be a creative, so that if people are interested in doing this as a life practice, that they know what they're getting into and they don't have the kind of rose tinted glasses. Yeah.
I think it's beautiful that you do that. But I think also, if we go back to at the start of the conversation, we were talking about sort of stepping into a space. I think it's so important to have, I mean, I know you told us your age, but, given for a kind of a mid-career kind of show or mini retrospective, if you like, it's a relatively young stage to have such an important show. And I think that's really important today for people because of this weird time collapse where people do seem to think that everything is instant. But I think actually looking at how much you've achieved in a relatively early stage of your career, but also that you are a woman doing things your own way and using your creativity to live a learning life, if you like, but using materials to express something and to create opportunities for others to think expansively, I think is really important.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, you said about not having rose-tinted spectacles on. You've tried and tested lots of different ways of having a living through your creativity. What aspects of what you do brings back the most sort of return for you? And by that, I mean in lots of, not just financial, but kind of that gives you the most back in return of your time.
That's a big question, because like you, I think, kind of suggesting there's lots of ways to be paid back. So you spoke about jewellery. It's the most frustrating part of my practice. I've tried not to do jewellery because it's so frustrating. Honestly, it's so. But what's really happening is that the friction between wanting to do something that's out of your skill set and understanding that it takes time to develop a skill. And that friction is a good life lesson. Yeah. And so jewellery has been really helpful in helping me just calm down and be kind of respectful of the fact that it doesn't happen overnight, as well as developing a creative handwriting that I feel is very distinct to myself because I'm making something by hand. But it's also the part of my practice I'm doing the least right now. And I'm doing loads of painting. And for me, that's probably huge transformation emotionally. And it's so, one of the things that when you go and see my show at the Design Museum, I can draw. It might not be clear for the public because you can't necessarily lay the objects out in this way. But when I go, I can see a clear line between before painting and after painting. And before painting, the work is very much either dark wood or ebonized wood or stained wood, so it looks black. And then or you're using the natural materials. And then after painting, suddenly color comes on the scene and you've got really vibrant reds and blues. And that was, painting opened up a whole new visual layer to my work with this color that wasn't there before. But it gave me the confidence to access that, as well as the freedom, because when you're painting, you don't have to think about the engineering problems that a chair might have. Do you see what I mean? So
yes,
I do feel like it's given a whole bunch of energy in a different way and output for my practice, and which is really, really, really valuable for me.
I think I really understand that, because I think usually when you're designing something or you're answering a problem or a question and working your way through delivering on that, when you're making art that nobody asked for, if you like, you're figuring out what's the good stuff as you go, right? So there's an open-endedness to it. and only you know when it's done.
Yeah, when it's reached what you're trying to say or achieve with it. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So have you ever proactively tried to sell your work, whatever the form is, or has that also been an organic thing?
No, I definitely proactively try and sell my work. I think we have something that we do really well in this country is teach people how to think creatively. Great Britain, really, really good creative education takes place in this country, really valuable. Opens up the mind and makes us interrogate and question. Something that we do really badly in this country is teaching those creative minds how to run a business, how to think about diversifying their business to enable them to earn money from parts of their business and have fun from parts of their business. Know that they don't always have to be doing the same thing. Like what I mean by that is you might really enjoy knitting brooches, but you might quickly realize you can only sell 10 brooches a year. But if I knit a huge blanket, I can sell it for 50 times more than I could a brooch. And there's a much bigger market for that. Do you see what I mean? But they don't necessarily teach us that business thinking of, okay, this is my skill set and it can be applied to these things and money can come from different ways. And I think that we should also like demystify this idea of earning money. You can be a creative, you can call yourself an artist, and the thing that you spend most of your time doing is a secretary. You're still an artist.
Yeah.
And this is something that's kind of, I feel like it's happened in the more recent years again. Like if we look at, oh gosh, the artist eludes me, the guy who cut his ear off.
Van Gogh.
Thank you. His main job wasn't being a painter. He got discovered after he died. He earned his money from doing other things during his life. Doesn't mean he was not a good painter. He's considered a great. But we've now think that we should live in the era of we earn all of our money from the thing we love to do the most. It's like trying to have your husband be your best friend, your therapist, your masseuse. No, my husband just has, his role is just to do that one thing. He's my husband. I have other things. I have other friends. I have to do those other things in my life. And it's the same with our creative relationships, which in some ways can be even more intimate than your husband relationship. It's like, this thing is a thing that you're growing. It's a thing that if you do it well can be a part of you your whole life. But to protect it, we can't ask it to do everything at the same time. It might develop into a practice that is able to pay for your mortgage and all of your holidays and all of it. But it also, at the start, when it's a baby at least, it's a baby. It's going to need time to grow. You're going to have to figure out ways to have other elements support your life so your practice has the space it can to grow. The emotional space, if you're stressed because this painting or this furniture or this jewellery has to sell, it has to be the best, you're going to do a piece of shit. If you give it the space because look, I've got my part-time job or I've got my full-time job and, you might be sleeping less hours, but the art, the creativity itself is going to be much stronger because you're not relying on it to do everything.
Yeah, I talk to artists every single day about these issues. And I think there's one thing I'd like to add on to that, Simone, maybe you can relate to this, is that I think there's also people don't realise that when you open up the space just to be in the studio making work, other anxieties happen. So when you're having to put pressure on your creativity to do all of the things, the anxiety of not knowing where the money's coming from affects your body, which affects your feelings and your actions and the results that you get. So if you can't regulate and manage your emotions long enough to stay in flow state to make work, then you've actually created another challenge, another problem. So I think you have to be honest about what kind of person are you, and if you are prone to like over thinking over, like so many of us creative people are, but where we actually, the anxiety of not knowing is so painful, then you're not actually going to make your best work. So you have to set yourself up so that you can regulate your body long enough to make great work, but also take the pressure off, like you say, to do that. So I think only when you know you're onto something that actually you'll get it, also getting public feedback on. And I think what you've done, and maybe we'll talk a little bit before we come to the close, Simone, is because you've said quite clearly that you are proactively also trying to sell. I think you are not leaving things to chance. You've made these amazing things. You've got enough data and enough intel that tells you that people like it. When they see it, they like it. When people see the stuff, they want it. So you have to help it get seen, right? So what do you proactively do to help the work get seen that people might part with some cash for it?
So this is a whole decade at least of my life, and I think it has to be, we have to talk about it like this, because and this is why I also kind of leaned back to me saying to the design museum, I'm not an industry lovey. When you study, there are some people, there's always one or two people who will immediately be picked and chosen to be the next greatest. And that doesn't mean they're not great, by the way. They can be great. But there's only one or two of them. And you're in a year of 75 or 100. So what are you going to do? Okay. And I remember graduating and I had a great time. It was amazing. Was deciding whether or not I was going to go back and continue my architecture thing. And I kind of looked around and saw so many women doing amazing work, sitting in their studios, doing nothing with it. And I saw the guys, and the guys were like putting on shows and they were doing all this stuff. And I was like, this is why are we waiting? And I think it's a kind of a mental shift that takes place to go like, part of us, girls are taught to be good girls and we're waiting to be told that we're good girls. We need to be very active. We need to take something out of the guys' book and like look at what they're doing really well and go, look, they're going out there, they're putting on shows, they're being active. So when I started, I had new work. I had this idea to make a chaise longue that was like talking about really difficult subjects, slavery and objectification and women and blah, blah, blah. But then I was also like, this is going to take a lot of money to make. If I don't have a platform to show it on afterwards, I'm wasting all of this energy. So I decided to reach out to my network, which I think is an underused facility when we look at the creative communities. Your peers are going to be one of the most valuable resources you ever have. So I looked at my peers and we got together and we formed a collective called Flock. And we started to put on shows. And I put on a show where I showed that piece of furniture. So that was the first thing. I didn't know how to do this, let's say. I didn't know how to do it. But the first response was, I don't know how to do it, so I have to learn by doing it. Which is don't wait. No one's going to teach. You can do a course, obviously. But the best way to do a lot of things is just to do it. So we've done these shows and it was at one of these shows that I met the curator who eventually went to buy that piece for the Smithsonian. And of people are always like, how did you get your piece in the Smithsonian? I don't know how I did it. I just put on a show and I was lucky enough that the right person walked through the door. Loads more other people walked through the door. They weren't working at the Smithsonian. But if you don't put the show on to begin with, then no one's going to buy the piece. Do you see?
Yeah.
So my first thing is you have to find a way to have your work seen. If you can't afford to put on a show, we have an amazing thing that didn't exist when I graduated called Instagram. Or maybe it started to exist and there was like 10 people on it. But when I graduated, Instagram wasn't the thing it is now. Now, part of the problem is it's so loud that it's now become problematic again. And I think in real life, things are going to be much more valuable than Instagram. There was a moment when I thought Instagram was actually more valuable now in real life. You have to have a good portfolio online. So when you talk to people, they can remember and they can look you up. but invite them to your shows.
Yeah.
You know, and then I went and I wanted to get business advice, and I worked with, I don't know, Patricia at the Design Trust, Patricia Van der Nacker. She's amazing, and she was one of the first people to just like talk to me about actual money. What are you actually selling? Have you looked at what you're actually selling successfully? You might think it's this, but really it's this. How many hours do you spend making this? Are you charging properly? All of these questions. And then it meant that when I was selling work, I suddenly felt more confident to ask for what it was actually that it should be asked for. So why is your necklace 500? Actually, it should be 1,000. It should be 2,000. You've spent this much. Do you have to pay rent? Did you have to buy special tools? Did you have to do, is it a special? Okay. Suddenly you go, oh, I'm undervaluing my work. I thought I was overvaluing my work. So there's a series of like learnings around business that we don't necessarily have in our natural education. We have the creativity taught, but not the business taught. And part of the best way to learn about the business side is to try and do, and then just to get advice. Pay someone to give you some business advice. Talk to other creatives further along in their career. Try and get some advice, and then make the appropriate changes, which is something I'm still doing because there's always more to learn and there's always more to do. I feel like in many ways, I feel like I've figured out how to be a creative individual, meaning if you give me a brief, I can give you an amazing outcome, or how to be an artist in terms of making amazing paintings and sculptures, all of that. How to be an amazing businesswoman is the next challenge. How to actually find a way to monetize it and set myself up to expand and grow to the next stages that I want of my practice. I think that's another part of learning that needs to be normalized and taken on into everyone's practices.
I agree, Simone. And actually, it's why after 36 years of being in the art world, bizarrely, that's one of the things I'm committed to doing every day now, which is helping artists and amazing makers like you to kind of make an impact but earn more money doing what they love. And I think the kind of the balance that you have in your practice, which is, you know, I can see if for anyone listening, you know, there are multiple potential income streams from, you know, commissions through to maybe some repeat sales. Do you have any kind of small additions or things that you work on? Do you have anything that is a repeatable income strand?
So yes. So this is part of the structure. You kind of think about, okay, what I'm going to do. This is my practice. Firstly, what actually sells? Can parts of your practice be something that's been said to me more recently? Licensed out. Can you license part of it? I never thought about licensing. You know, can you change the material on this necklace so that it doesn't cost you so much to make, and make an edition of 10? You know, these are all the kind of things that I think a healthy business mind application to your practice needs to have. And I don't think it's something that happens naturally to creative people in the UK, because we're not stressed in that way. And the reason why I say the UK is because I was shocked when I went to study at the Royal College of Art how many of my Dutch counterparts had this as a normal part of their brain. And that they in Holland they just teach you about business alongside. So it's great. You're a great illustration artist. Now, how are you going to earn money from being an illustration artist? They ask you that whilst you're in education, so you can actually think about it. Whereas over here, I feel like that question doesn't come up. We just want to get the most beautiful or most amazing thing out, which is great. But then we don't know how to actually function in the world as a financial monolith. We don't know how to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's also something that, from my perspective, I would say they're not they might feel separate to a lot of creative people, but there are creative solutions that actually, when you learn
Yes,
the language of it, it's actually quite an exciting creative problem that you're solving. And once you've
exactly.
learnt the language, it's a bit like when you learn a new medium language. Actually, creative people are really good at it. And
Mm,
so that's sort of like you've just said, actually, once somebody gave you the clues, well, just make an addition in a slightly different material. Bob's your
mm,
uncle,
mm.
you're like, oh, yeah, okay. In that
Why
case,
didn't I think of that?
I've got loads more ideas where that
Yeah,
came
yeah,
from.
yeah.
So I think for anyone listening, the kind of having a smaller scale, repeatable, is one of the
Mm,
clues to a sustainable creative career, because that actually is
100%.
what keeps the kind of income rolling
Mm,
whilst you're working on big bespoke pieces or big commissions. And I have to
100%.
say, if I for one am going to be queuing up for those not slightly more affordable works, Simone, because
Mm,
I'd love to be wearing and sporting one of your amazing pieces. But also, I think I love the venture into homeware, I have to say,
mm,
because I love being surrounded by creative work in my domestic environment. So
yes.
I love the fact that you move between scales, between textures, between materials, with the same ideas at the core. And I think
Mm,
that's what doesn't get lost, even when you're working, trying to problem solve the finances. It's the
mm.
same concepts, right?
It is. It is, yeah. Um, I think in that way, I think I'm lucky because I do think that that element is quite natural to me. It's just the really taking the time to understand creativity as a business model is a different pathway in your brain, I
Mm.
think, and that's the thing that I think we need to do when we're looking at long careers and careers that don't just die out after one good idea. It's
Yeah.
this idea of like actually just taking the time to look at how you develop yourself and your practice so that it becomes elements of it can become more accessible or elements can become more bespoke, and it's still all you, but
Yeah.
it's about finding the different avenues that your practice kind of can open up and allow for these things to be part of.
Yeah. So the show's still on. So you're still moving through that, but you're
Mm.
keeping the wheels moving. Can you share with us, what are you obsessed with right now, Simone?
Obsessed, oh gosh. You know what, it's a hard question because my brain is it's got a few things happening in it right
Yeah.
now. I think I am trying to do some of what we've just been discussing. I'm
Mm.
looking at developing some objects, some new sculptures, but also some smaller objects that I can have for people. Because what I found is people love my work, and then because it's like handmade one-offs, super expensive. So I'm like, okay, is there a part that I can develop so that we can have a part of the practice that is editions or smaller and more affordable so that more people can have pieces. And then other than that, I'm just having fun painting right now. I've got a big commission that I'm working on, and that's going well. It's coming to a close and I have to get all of the bits together and blah, blah, blah. But that's been really fun too.
Are we allowed to know where it's for?
Oh, it's nice. It's I'm based in Tottenham, and it's in the new development in Tottenham Hale, Ferry Island. They've got their main building is going to have a big entrance space, and so they want a piece of art for that big entrance space when you come in. So I'm making something for them. I'm designing.
Wow.
I'm not designing. I'm painting something for them.
That sounds amazing. I could really see you painting on ceramic tiles as well at that
Oh yeah,
scale.
I mean that would be amazing.
Yeah, well, anyone listening, you know where to come. Simone's your
Definitely.
woman. So besides the design museum show, where can people stay connected to you? How can they stay in touch with what you're doing, Simone?
I'm on Instagram at Simone Brewster _London. And I have a website and I have a mailing list. You can sign up to my mailing list if you go to my website, and actually you can get to it via my Instagram as well. those are great places. And just, generally just reach out. I'm not in a glass tower. If someone wants to ask a question, they can feel welcome to.
And listeners, take note, Simone has a newsletter.
Why is that a thing? Is that a thing?
It's a thing. And I think it's so important, because what you were saying about never knowing where somebody's coming from, I can tell you that cultivation, staying connected to your true fans, your champions, is one of the best things you could be doing. So I think making more of connecting with your champions, I think, is also a way to have a sustainable creative career. So it's something that I've done special episodes on the podcast about. So we'll be signing up and looking forward to staying connected that way. Simone, it's been an absolute treat. Thank you so much for being so open and honest and sharing your insights and learnings, and can't wait for our listeners to see the show too. Thank you so much. One of the things that really stayed with me was Simone's commitment to following the question rather than the medium. The inquiry underneath the work is often what matters the most, not just to the maker, but to the audience too. If you stay true to that, your work can evolve across disciplines while still feeling unmistakably yours. I also loved her honesty about making bad work, because we spend so much time trying to avoid failure that we forget that it's simply part of becoming better. As Simone says, the difference isn't whether you make bad work, it's whether you're willing to keep going, learn from it, and make the next piece. There was also so much wisdom in our conversation about business. Creativity and commerce aren't opposing forces. Learning how to build a business around your creativity gives your work the time, space, and stability that it needs to flourish. That isn't selling out, it's creating the conditions for your best work to exist. If this conversation resonated with you, I'd love you to share it with another creative person who needs to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying the podcast, please do follow the show, leave a rating or review wherever you listen, and share the episode. It genuinely helps us to reach more creative people who need these conversations. Until next time, keep making, keep questioning, and keep creating extraordinary work. Thanks for being here.